Your tomatoes are wilting at 2 in the afternoon even though you watered this morning. Your squash leaves have this white powdery film creeping across them. The pepper transplants you put in 2 weeks ago look exactly the same as the day you planted them. Not dead but not growing either, just sitting there like they've given up. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're doing the math on what you've spent this season. The seeds, the transplants, the soil amendments, the fertilizer, and you're wondering if any of it is actually going to pay off. I have been exactly where you are, multiple times, and the hardest part isn't the dead plants. The hardest part is not knowing why you did what you thought was right. You watered, you weeded, you planted at what seemed like the right time, and the garden still looks like it's struggling. That feeling is genuinely demoralizing, and I don't want you to spend another summer wondering what you're doing wrong. Because here's what I've learned after 15 years of gardening, homesteading, and growing food in conditions ranging from scorching Oklahoma summers to wet fungal pressure nightmares in the mid-Atlantic. Most garden failures in June come down to a specific predictable set of mistakes. Not bad luck, not bad soil, not the wrong seeds. Mistakes. And mistakes, unlike weather and soil type and Japanese beetle infestations, are things you can actually fix. Today, I'm going through 10 of the most damaging June gardening mistakes, the ones that quietly wreck gardens while the gardener has no idea they're even happening. Some of these are going to be familiar, a few are going to surprise you, and at least one of them, probably the one closest to the end of this list, is going to make you look at something you do every single week in your garden in a completely different way. So stay with me through this whole list, because catching even 2 or 3 of these mistakes before they compound into a lost season could mean the difference between a harvest that feeds your family and a garden full of regret by August. Real quick before we jump in, drop a comment and tell me where you're gardening this summer and what your biggest challenge has been so far this season. I read every single comment, and your answers genuinely shape the content I make. All right, let's get into it. Mistake number 10, planting too much too fast. I'm going to start here because this is the mistake that sets every other mistake in motion. And it's the one that new gardeners almost universally make in June because June feels urgent. The season is here. The soil is warm. The nurseries are full of beautiful transplants. You have an ambitious list and a willing back, and you want to get everything in the ground right now. And then by the 3rd week of June, you are completely overwhelmed. I've done this. One year, I put in 42 tomato plants. 42. I thought I was being productive. By mid-July, I had a jungle I couldn't manage, plants that weren't getting properly pruned or supported, pest pressure I couldn't stay on top of because there was simply too much garden for one person to monitor, and a harvest that was frankly worse than the year I grew 20 plants carefully. The mistake isn't enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is good. The mistake is confusing square footage with success. More plants doesn't mean more food. More well-tended plants means more food. June is the month where a manageable garden becomes a thriving garden, and an overplanted garden becomes a disaster. The heat is coming, the pests are coming, the weeds are coming, and if you've spread yourself too thin, you won't have the bandwidth to deal with any of it effectively. The rule I try to follow now: plant what you can reasonably water, weed, and harvest in about 30 minutes a day. For most people in most garden sizes, that's more modest than they think. A 4x8 raised bed planted well will produce more usable food than a 20x20 in-ground plot that's being half-heartedly managed. If you're feeling the June urgency right now, take a breath. Think about what you actually eat and what you'll actually harvest. Plant that. Plant it well. Tend it thoroughly. You will eat better from it than you would from twice as much garden, half the attention. Mistake number 9, ignoring soil temperature before planting. Here's one that costs gardeners weeks of growing time every single June, and most people don't even know it's happening. Soil temperature is not the same as air temperature. On a sunny June day when it's 82 degrees in the air, the soil at planting depth might be 65 degrees. And for warm season crops like sweet potatoes, melons, okra, and basil, that difference matters enormously. Plants don't just grow slowly in cold soil, they essentially pause. Roots don't develop, nutrients don't get absorbed, germination stalls, and transplants sit in a kind of suspended animation that people mistake for healthy establishment when it's actually stress. I spent 3 seasons wondering why my basil always looked purple tinged and sad for the first 2 weeks after transplanting in early June. The purpling, which is a sign of phosphorus deficiency, wasn't happening because my soil lacked phosphorus. It was happening because my soil was too cold for the plant to absorb the phosphorus that was already there. A soil thermometer is a $10 investment that will pay for itself in the first season. You want soil temps of at least 60 degrees for beans, cucumbers, and squash, 65 for tomatoes and peppers, 70 or above for sweet potatoes, melons, and okra. Southern gardeners are usually there by June 1st. In the upper Midwest or the Mountain West, you might not hit those temperatures until mid-June or even later. Check your soil temperature before you plant, not after. It's one of those small habits that separates the gardeners who have consistent results from the ones who can't figure out why the same variety performs completely differently from year to year. Mistake number 8, overhead watering in the heat of the day. I want to be careful here because the watering advice in gardening is so often simplified to the point of being useless. Water deeply and infrequently is the kind of advice that sounds wise and means almost nothing without context. So let me be specific. The mistake isn't watering during the day per se. In an emergency, your transplants are wilting, your seedlings are about to cook in 95-degree heat. Yes, water them, time of day be damned. But as a regular practice, overhead watering during the heat of the day creates a specific set of problems. These problems compound over the course of a June growing season. The first problem is evaporation, water applied to the soil surface in full sun and high heat. It evaporates before it can penetrate deeply. You're essentially watering the air. The plant gets a momentary surface level drink, and then the soil dries out again. The second problem is foliar damage. Water droplets on leaves in direct sun can act as magnifying lenses, and while the physics of this is sometimes debated, the real-world reality I've observed over many seasons is that plants watered overhead in midday heat show more leaf scorch and more disease pressure, especially fungal issues like early blight, powdery mildew, and gray mold, and more overall stress than plants watered at the base in the morning. The fix is simple. Water at the base of plants, not over the top, and do it in the early morning, roughly before 10 a.m., so that any moisture that does get on foliage has time to evaporate before the heat peaks. Morning watering also ensures the water soaks in. And if you're still hand watering everything, I want to gently push you toward drip irrigation or soaker hoses, not because they're fancy, but they solve the problem. A $25 soaker hose on a simple timer is one of the highest return investments you can make in your June garden. Mistake number 7, not hardening off transplants. This one is going to resonate with a lot of you who grew gorgeous seedlings under your grow lights, and then you watch them turn yellow, sun-scald, or just collapse within a week of going outside. Hardening off is the process of gradually acclimating them. It's about acclimating indoor-grown plants to outdoor conditions, sun intensity, wind, temperature fluctuation, over a period of 7 to 10 days. And it is absolutely essential. The problem is that it's easy to skip when you're excited to get things in the ground, and consequences don't always show up immediately. Here's what happens in the plant when you skip this step. Leaves that have grown under indoor lights or greenhouse conditions have different cell structure. They have thinner cuticles and fewer protective compounds than leaves that develop outdoors. When you take that plant directly from a protected environment into June sun, the UV intensity alone is enough to cause real physiological damage. The leaves bleach, the cells break down, the plant goes into stress mode. The plant redirects all its energy to repair rather than growth. I learned this lesson with pepper plants. I'd grown the most beautiful shishito seedlings. They had stocky stems, deep green leaves, and strong root systems. I transplanted them directly outside on a warm June day, and within 48 hours. The leaves had this papery, bleached-out look like someone had held a weak torch near them. It took 3 weeks for those plants to recover. 3 weeks of the growing season gone, because I didn't take 10 days to harden them off properly. The hardening off process isn't complicated. Start by setting your transplants outside in a shaded, protected spot for 2 to 3 hours on day 1. Bring them back inside. Gradually increase exposure. By day 10, they're ready to live outside permanently. It takes patience, but the plants establish in days instead of weeks. We're at number 6, and if you take only one action item from this entire video, make it this one. Put mulch on your garden, right now. I'm not being dramatic. Mulch is the single most impactful thing you can do for a June garden, and it's what most struggling gardeners aren't doing. I thought mulch was aesthetic, a nice to have for tidy gardens. Here's what it actually does. It dramatically reduces soil temperature during heat spikes. It retains soil moisture, reducing how often you need to water by as much as 50% in hot weather. It also suppresses weeds effectively. Weeds compete with your plants for water and nutrients and absolutely explode in June without suppression. Mulch also prevents soil compaction from rain. It feeds the soil food web as it breaks down, improving soil structure, and it prevents soil-borne pathogens from splashing up onto your leaves. Pathogens like early blight spores and fusarium live in the soil. A 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch is a physical barrier between those spores and your leaves. It's not perfect protection, but it meaningfully delays disease progression. And in tomato growing, delay is often the difference between success and loss. Use wood chips, straw, shredded leaves, or grass clippings. Keep mulch a few inches back from direct stem contact to prevent stem rot. Apply 4 inches deep. And then replenish it. Mulch breaks down, especially in the heat and humidity of a southern summer. Check it every few weeks and add more. Now we're in the second half of the list, and I want you to know that the remaining 5 mistakes are the ones that cause the most damage. Not because they're the most dramatic, but because they're the hardest to see. These are mistakes that happen slowly and invisibly. Pay close attention. Mistake number 5, over-fertilizing with nitrogen. This is the moment I want you to sit with because it goes against your instinct to help your plants. The instructions say apply every 2 weeks, you do it. Your plants are a deep, lush, dark green. They look healthy. You feel like you're doing a good job. But your tomatoes have enormous vines and almost no fruit. Your peppers are huge but flowering poorly. Your squash is a monster but setting few fruits. You have nitrogen toxicity, not deficiency. Toxicity. And it's one of the most common self-inflicted plant problems in the American June garden. Here's the biology. Nitrogen drives vegetative growth. Leaves, stems, size. Plants need it, particularly early in their development. But once a plant reaches reproductive stage, once it starts to flower and fruit, it needs less nitrogen and more phosphorus and potassium. If you keep hammering it with nitrogen, you are literally telling the plant to keep making leaves instead of making fruit. You've hacked the plant's hormones. The signs are deep green, lush, oversized foliage, abundant leaf growth but sparse or delayed flowering, fruits that are slow to set or irregular. In severe cases, you'll see nitrogen burn, tips and edges of leaves turning brown and crispy as if scorched. The fix depends on how far along you are. Stop the nitrogen-heavy fertilizer immediately. Switch to a low-nitrogen, high-phosphorus option by something marketed for bloom or fruit development. If you've got severe burn, flush the soil deeply with plain water 2 or 3 times to help move excess nitrogen below the root zone. And going forward, match your fertilizer to your plant's growth stage. High nitrogen for seedlings, lower nitrogen, higher phosphorus and potassium for flowering. The label numbers tell you the ratio, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Read them and use them intentionally to ensure your June garden thrives. Mistake number 4, ignoring pest pressure until it's visible damage. We're in the top 4, and this one is about timing. Specifically about the window between when a pest problem starts and when most gardeners notice it, and what happens in that window. Most gardeners respond to pest pressure reactively. They see the chewed leaves, the stipple discoloration, the colonies of aphids on the undersides of leaves, and then they deal with it. That's natural. That's how most of us learned. But reactive pest management in June is almost always working uphill, because by the time the damage is visible, the population has already established. And the damage to the plant, including stress-related secondary problems like reduced immune response, poor fruit set, and vulnerability to disease, has already begun. The practice that changed my approach entirely is called scouting. Once a week, I walk every row of my garden and actively look, not just glance, at the undersides of leaves, the growing tips of plants, the soil at the base of stems, and the overall color and posture of each plant. I'm looking for early signs, a few aphids here, an egg cluster there, a squash vine borer entry hole before the plant starts to wilt. In Zone 6B through 8, June is when squash vine borers are laying eggs at the base of squash stems. If you catch that before the larvae enter the stem, you can remove the eggs manually. They're small, reddish-brown, and laid individually on the lower stem. That 5-minute scouting walk can save an entire squash crop. In the same zones, June is when the first generation of tomato hornworms hatches. A single hornworm can defoliate a tomato plant branch in 48 hours, but if you find it when it's small, and you will find it if you're scouting, you can simply remove it. No spray needed. Scouting also tells you when beneficial insect populations are building up. If you've got good lacewing and ladybug populations in your garden, they may handle early aphid pressure before it becomes a problem, and you never need to intervene at all, but you only know that if you're paying attention early enough to see it. The rule I follow, intervene at the first sign of a problem, not the third or fourth. You'll use less intervention, do less damage to beneficial insects, and lose less plant material. Every week. Mistake number 3, planting sun-loving crops in the wrong spot. We're in the top 3, and I want to talk about a mistake that can't be undone once it's made, which is exactly why it belongs near the top of this list. Most gardeners know in a general way that vegetables need sun. 6 to 8 hours is the number that gets repeated everywhere. But I've watched so many people internalize 6 to 8 hours as a threshold, a pass/fail, rather than as something that actively shapes which crops go where. And that misunderstanding leads to years of inexplicably underperforming gardens. Here is the reality. There is a significant difference between 6 hours of morning sun and 6 hours of afternoon sun. And there is an even more significant difference between 6 hours of sun in June in Atlanta and 6 hours of sun in June in Seattle. In the southeast and southwest, where June sun is intense and afternoon temperatures regularly top 95 degrees, full afternoon exposure can actually become too much. For crops like lettuce, spinach, cilantro, peas, and even some pepper varieties, these crops do better in spots that get strong morning sun and afternoon shade. The exact opposite of what most sun requirement advice would suggest. In the Pacific Northwest and Upper Midwest, where June sun is less intense, you need every hour of sun. A spot that gets 6 hours in Seattle may not produce the same results as the same 6 hours in Dallas. The mistake I see most often is a warm season crops. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, melons, cucumbers, planted in spots that are partially shaded by a fence, a tree, or a house. That wasn't fully accounted for when planning. I had this happen with a pepper bed that was shaded by a wooden fence from about 2 in the afternoon onward. Every year those peppers were slower to fruit and lower yielding than identical varieties in a fully exposed bed 20 feet away. The answer, when I finally figured it out, was simply to move them. Before you plant in June, especially in a new garden space or a new bed, track the sun in that spot over the course of a full day. Mark down when direct sun starts, when it ends, and note any obstructions that cast moving shadows. Do this once and it'll inform your planting decisions for years. All right, number 2. And I want to be honest with you that this one took me the longest to fully understand. Because pruning is the area of vegetable gardening where the advice is most contradictory, most zone-specific, and most crop-specific. And where doing the wrong thing can genuinely hurt your harvest as much as doing nothing. Let me focus on tomatoes because that's where pruning decisions matter most. The debate is usually about suckers, those new shoots that emerge from the junction between the main stem and a side branch. Remove them or leave them? The answer is, it depends on what type of tomato you're growing and what your June looks like. For indeterminate tomatoes, the vining types like Brandywine or Cherokee Purple, pruning suckers is generally beneficial, especially in humid climates. It keeps airflow through the plant, reduces disease pressure, and concentrates energy into fruit production. I prune my indeterminate tomatoes to 1 or 2 main leaders, stake them vertically, and remove all suckers below the first flower cluster. In my humid zone 6B garden, this practice alone significantly reduced my early blight and late blight losses. For determinate tomatoes, the bush types like Roma, Celebrity, and Rutgers, you should not heavily prune suckers. Determinate tomatoes grow to a set size and produce a set number of fruit sites. Removing suckers from a determinate tomato removes future fruit sites. I've seen gardeners prune determinates the same way they prune indeterminates and wonder why their Roma plants produced almost nothing. The other pruning mistake I see constantly in June is not pruning at all on large, sprawling plants like summer squash, zucchini, cucumbers, and melons, and then being unable to find the fruit until it's overripe, unable to see pest damage until it's advanced, and dealing with plants so tangled they're impossible to manage. For squash and cucumbers, removing the oldest leaves, the big lower fan leaves that are starting to yellow or show powdery mildew, opens up airflow dramatically. In fact, removing diseased lower leaves and getting them out of the garden entirely removes the primary inoculum source and slows disease spread significantly. Don't be afraid to prune aggressively on cucurbits in June. They grow back faster than you think. And here it is, the number 1 June gardening mistake, the one I saved for last because it's the one that, once you understand it, changes your entire relationship with your garden. Mistake number 1, treating every plant the same way. I know that might sound vague, so let me make it concrete, because what I'm talking about is the single deepest source of garden failure. The idea that there is one correct approach to watering, fertilizing, pruning, and care, and that if you just apply it uniformly, things will work out. Gardens don't work that way. Plants don't work that way. And June, with its complexity of heat, humidity, storm patterns, and changing day length, is the month that exposes this misunderstanding. A basil plant and a pepper plant in the same raised bed have completely different water needs. The basil wants consistent moisture and will wilt dramatically in June heat. The pepper, which evolved in hot, dry conditions, actually sets fruit better with a mild stress period that firms up the soil slightly between waterings. Water them both the same way, and one suffers. A brandywine tomato and a sun gold cherry tomato have completely different nutrient needs, different pruning requirements, and different harvest behaviors. Treat them identically, and neither performs best. A zucchini plant in its third week of production needs fundamentally different care than a zucchini plant in its first week. Same species, same bed, same care routine, and yet the needs change. The third week plant is hitting its peak stress period, needs more water, pollinator support, and is about to start being vulnerable to vine borers if it isn't already. Here is the insight I want to leave you with. The gardeners who consistently grow abundant gardens aren't the ones who have the best schedule or fertilizer. They're the ones who observe. They walk their garden with attention. They notice that this plant looks slightly paler than yesterday, that this one has a subtle curl suggesting water stress, that this one is flowering but not setting fruit and needs a gentle shake for pollination, that this one has a new pest and it needs to be dealt with today before tomorrow. They treat each plant as an individual with its own needs in its own moment, not as a unit in a system being managed from a clipboard. That shift is what separates a good June from a lost one. And it's available to every single person watching this video right now, regardless of experience level, regardless of garden size, regardless of how many plants you've killed before. Look, nobody gets June right every year. I certainly don't. I still make some of these mistakes in some form. Growing things is humbling in a way that's actually one of its gifts. It keeps reminding you that you're in relationship with living systems. But every mistake you identify, every pattern you recognize, that's experience accumulating. That's the garden teaching you. And the gardeners who stay curious, who don't give up after a hard June, who come back in July and August with what they've learned, those are the ones who have gardens that genuinely feed them. So if you caught yourself in 1 or 2 or even 5 mistakes today, don't feel bad. Feel useful. Feel like you just got handed a map to a better season. Now go out there and make something grow. And drop a comment letting me know which mistake hit closest to home for you this season. Your answers help more people than you realize. They need to hear they're not alone. Whatever your June looks like right now, there's still time to turn it around. I'll see you in the next one.